There she is up there. She passed on. That's her whole family. That's the Jeffersons from Georgetown. And she was the one on the end there. She was the baby girl out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. And she was the first black nurse to ever graduate from in Georgetown.
Oh, wow.
And she was the first black nurse. And I remember one day she came home and told me, said, Harvey, no, this was when we were in San Marcos. When we moved to San Marcos, she went to school, went to work. They wouldn't let husband and wife work at the Gary Job Corps, so she had to go to work as a nurse here in San Marcos in 1967, I think, when she went to work. We moved in 66. And I remember one day she went to work for the Hayes County Health Department. And she was going all around, and everyone had a disease called TB, tuberculosis.
Sure.
And it was really bad, and especially among black people, having tuberculosis. Matter of fact, her second sister right next to her died with the TB.
Mm-hmm.
And one day she came home, and she said, Harvey said, you're going to have to put me in your Black History collection, because I was all in the Black History, local Black History, state Black History, national. And I said, what? I said, what do you got to do? You got to break the color line, something like that. She was a Libra, and she was tough, and Libras are tough. And I usually ask people, when I first start talking about a Libra being tough, I ask them, now, are you a Libra? No. I say, okay. And one time, one lady heard me talking about Libras, and she said, sir, she walked away and chatted with a white lady, pat me on the shoulder, sir, don't be talking about us Libras like that. I said, oh, no, I just talk about my Libra. So then, but she came on and said, Harvey, you're going to put me in your collection. I said, why? She said, they introduced me today at the health department, at Hayes County Health Department, and said, Miss Miller is from Georgetown, Texas, and she was the first black nurse in Georgetown, and she's the first colored nurse San Marcos, Hayes County Health Department's ever had. So I had to end up putting it in my collection as the first black Hayes County nurse, working for the Hayes County Health Department, because another lady challenged me about it. Later she said, now she wasn't the first black nurse in Hayes County. I said, no, I'm not talking about the first black nurse in Hayes County. I'm saying the first black nurse in Hayes County Health Department.
Right.
So, but she was a nurse.
So she grew up in Georgetown too?
Yeah, she grew up in Georgetown.
And she also went to the Carver School?
Yeah, she graduated from Carver School, and she was really smart, and she graduated a year before I did.
What was how many students were at the Carver School?
Well, back then, I think it was around something like 250 or maybe 300, something like that. You know, wasn't a whole lot of students there.
Right.
And like I say, you got this old building on there that I showed you this building.
Right.
And it had upstairs and downstairs, and the senior class upstairs, some of the class upstairs. And they finally tore it down when they integrated. That's when they decided to build West Side School and all that.
Right. And so what do you remember about the school? Like what was the building like? Who were your favorite teachers? What were your favorite classes?
Well, I think my favorite teacher was, at that time we had a teacher named Westbrooks and a principal named Westbrooks, but my favorite was Professor Banks. And he was the principal at that time, and then I had a Miss I forget her name now. It was a teacher that taught math, you know, arithmetic mainly, what they called it then. It wasn't math. They didn't use that word as arithmetic and stuff like that, you know. And I was telling you about when I was on the track team, and back then during certification days. Now, you know, they mix up when they have the track meets at the end of the year to make the run and see who's going to be the champion. Then we had to go to a school in Prairie View University, down next to Houston. And that's where my wife went to school, in Prairie View, and she went there, and she didn't get a degree there. She went to Prairie View, and then she went to a black school, and that's a black university, and went to a black university in Austin called Houston-Tillotson.
Yeah, and did you go with her? I mean, were you?
No, I never did go to school, college. I went down there one day with her. I remember her mama. She was coming home one day, and her mama paid my way to go all the way down there just to ride back with her, because she was so demanding. So she wouldn't have to ride back on the train by herself, you know.
Yeah.
But we had to go to Prairie View for our track meets. In other words, when it's track meet time, we'd have to go to Prairie View. And here's two of the certificates I won to certify that Harvey Miller of the Carver High School in Georgetown, Texas, April the 20th, 1946, and won second place in a 220-yard dash. And back in those days, we had a 220-yard dash, a 100-yard dash, 220-yard dash, 440-yard dash, and then we had the relays, you know, we had to run around.
Right.
And then I had another one certificate I got, Harvey Milk, Carver High School, in 1948, and this just before I graduated. And I won the 440-yard dash. I won second place. I don't know if I guess I never did win no first place. I won the second place, second place in the 440-yard dash.
Mm-hmm.
And but at that time, but like I say, it's just a way of life in school back those, and so we had to go there. We knew we had to go there. And when we played football, we played Taylor, the black team in Taylor, and the all-time, and situations like that. And there's one thing I admire about San Marcos, when the Brown voiced the Bird of Education passed in 1954, that all schools in America were supposed to have been integrated. San Marcos integrated, and here's a picture of the girl that was on that school when she was a little girl, that her daddy. And this is here, and this is a book. I'm going to give you one of these books here about Carver integration, when my wife was president of Carver PTA. But back in those days, that's just the way life was, We'd, and this was a white school, and we'd, way of life, And it wasn't nothing, but it's time beginning to change. And like I said, at that time, we were having a lot of problems in the South,
Right.
But one thing I said about the Brown versus Bird education, when it passed in 1954, it was in the middle of the term, and San Marcos integrated the next year, voluntarily, no problem at all. They integrated the next year in '55.
When you read kind of older newspaper clippings, people kind of talk about Carver being kind of in bad condition in the in the '60s. Is that the way you remember it when you were growing up, when you were in elementary school? Were the conditions bad then, or did it become?
No, they didn't get bad until later on.
What was it like when you were there?
When I was there near my graduation time, and at that time, you could see the cracks in the building. Here's this big old rock building here, and you could see the cracks sometimes in the side of it. And then one of the things about it, the Carver School was sitting on the kind of like on a bluff, a blue hole. And I don't think they call it the blue hole anymore, but the river go across there. And so it was called the blue hole, and we're sitting on the cliff there, and it began to kind of lean. And that's one of the things that brought about integration in Georgetown, is when my wife was the president of the Carver PTA. And I got all these articles, Carver PTA group petitioned the trustees for a new building.
Yeah.
Now, when they went and took a look at it and found out it was in bad shape, they decided that, and there's the articles in here, it's in the article, they decided that rather than to build a new school, they called a meeting and they said, Harvey, we need to meet with y'all. So we're not going to pay our taxpayers money. After the article comes out in the Williams County Sun, new Carver School, $142,000. So we're not going to pay our taxpayers money for no segregated school. It's time to integrate. And when they said that, I almost had a heart attack, because I couldn't believe anybody's thinking like that. And the next thing you know, when this article came out, the next thing you know, that's when we started to integrate. And that's building, that's the article there about Carver PTA. My wife was president of Carver PTA. So I got all these clippings about the integration and when they built a new school.
And y'all had 4 kids, is that right? You and your wife?
Yeah,
four children.
We had four girls. Yeah.
And they were all going to Carver.
Well, it's just my last two of my oldest 2 girls, because Tricia wasn't born until late, and then before we moved down in '66, right after integration, they were going, and Kathy had just started going, but by the time Kathy